Welcome to another episode of Mythic Drafting and a 10-part series on how to draft each of the colour pairs in March of the Machine. Today we'll be taking a look at black and red, but before we get into that, make sure to leave a like on the video below and subscribe to the channel as well. We'll be releasing upcoming drafts once the set is released on this channel, so be sure to check it out then. But now let's take a look at how to draft black-red. And as always, I like to start by looking at the signpost uncommons. The first of which is Stormclaw Rager, which is 1 black-red for a 2/2 Ogre Warrior, and it has the ability that you can pay 1 mana to sacrifice another creature or artifact, and when you do, you put a +1/+1 counter on Stormclaw Rager and draw a card. Now this can only be activated as a sorcery, so it can't be used to sacrifice creatures in response to instants, but it's still a powerful engine that allows you to trade weaker creatures for a card and grow Stormclaw Rager into a big threat in the late game. The next uncommon is Invasion of Asgol, which is a black and a red for a 4 defender counter battle, and when it enters the battlefield, target player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker and loses 1 life, and then if you manage to deal 4 damage to this, it flips into Ashen Reaper, which is a menace 2/1 zombie elemental, and at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on it if a permanent was put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn. I think this is a pretty decent battle, as you'd probably play the front side of this anyway, as it can come down and trade for that 2-drop, and then if you manage to defeat the battle in the early game, it gives you a pretty strong creature that's going to be able to take benefit from all your sacrifice outlets and grow into a huge menacing threat. I think both of these cards pretty clearly indicate that black and red has a strong sacrifice theme in it in this set, and you're going to want to look out for cards that can take benefit of that or a good sacrifice fodder. Some of the powerful uncommons in black and red are Merciless Repurposing, which is 4 black for an instant, exile target creature, and then you incubate 3, which is create an incubated token with 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and you can pay 2 to transform it into a 0/0 creature. So effectively this just exiles their biggest threat and then gives you a 3/3 the next turn or on the same turn if you happen to have 8 mana. I think this card is quite expensive, but there are a lot of really powerful bombs in this set and a lot of them have recursion themes. So I think that exiling is going to be quite relevant, and the incubate token can either be sacrificed straight away in this deck or use the next turn to create another threat on the board for yourself. Another card that I think is going to be quite strong in black-red is Completed Huntmaster, which is 2 and a black for a 2/3 Phyrexian Elf Warrior, and you can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice another creature or artifact, and you incubate 3. This card's quite strong. I think it's got a good defensive body for the early game, and if you get any sacrifice engine going or any value creatures to sacrifice to it, it's just going to turn them into pretty efficient creatures as well. Another card that wants to be sacrificed is Furnace Gremlin, which is 1 and a red for a 1/2 Phyrexian Gremlin, and you can pay 1 and a red to pump it up +1/+0 until end of turn, and when it dies, you incubate X, where X is its power. Now, this card I think is going to be quite decent in the black-red deck, as you're going to be able to sacrifice it to something like Completed Huntmaster to get an incubate token off Huntmaster, and you're also going to get another incubated token off Furnace Gremlin. This is going to help you create multiple sacrifice triggers, give you multiple sacrifice fodder to repeat over the next coming turns, and additionally it can function pretty well by itself in that it can just attack and threaten to pump itself, and if you have any ways to put +1/+1 counters on it, it just gets even better. Another powerful uncommon in this archetype is Phyrexian Gargantua, which is 4 black for a 4/4 Phyrexian Horror, and when it enters the battlefield you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. I think this card is just going to be really good in most black decks. It's effectively a Muldrifter that's just a bigger body and has a minor downside with the life loss. However, there are some effects in black that allow you to gain some life to offset this, and I think this card will be quite good in black-red. Another card that might be decent in black-red that doesn't have a sacrifice theme is Shivan Branchburner, which is 5 red for a Convoke Flying Haste 4/4 Dragon. I think this card's going to be decent because black-red is going to want to play a lot of cheap creatures and artifacts that will potentially be able to convoke to play this on even turn 4 or most likely turn 5, and a Flying Haste 4/4 on turn 5 is a really hard game to deal with and is going to push through a lot of damage. Another card that's going to be quite good is Gift of Completion, which is 1 black for an enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield, you incubate 3. And then whenever a Phyrexian you control dies, you surveil 1. So effectively, you want to be playing this, I think, on turn 4, and you want to immediately flip the incubate token so that you're effectively getting a 3/3 on turn 4, and then every Phyrexian that you sacrifice is going to surveil 1. This is going to give you a bit of an engine to dig to your better cards and help make sure that you mill through all the lands that you don't want to draw. And additionally, it has some upside in that you can play this on turn 2 and then flip the token the next turn, and it has some versatility with how you spend the mana to get the ultimate creature. Some other cards that I think are going to be quite good are the 2 black flip uncommons, and while they're not strictly black-red, they're both black, and you can pay the transform costs with Phyrexian mana. The first one's Blight Reaper Thallid, which is 1 black for a 2/2 fungus, and then for 3 and a green Phyrexian mana, you can transform it into Blightsower Thallid, which is a 3/3. Whenever this creature transforms into it or dies, create a 1/1 Phyrexian Saproling creature token. So for 2 mana and then 3 mana and 2 life on the next turn, you're getting a 3/3 and a 1/1, and then when it dies, you're getting another 1/1. This is just a really efficiently costed creature, and additionally, it's 3 bodies for you to sacrifice potentially, or you can just sacrifice the 2 Saproling tokens and keep the 3/3 around. The next one is Nuzumi Freewheeler, which is 3 and a black for a 3/3 Menace Rat Samurai, and when it enters the battlefield, each player mills 3 cards. And then you can pay 5 and a white Phyrexian mana to transform it into Hideous Fleshwheeler, which is a 4/5 Menace Phyrexian Rat. And when it transforms into the Fleshwheeler, you put target permanent card with mana value 2 or less from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Now, this isn't the kind of body you're going to want to be sacrificing, but it's just an efficient creature and a big threat if you can flip it late game. It's going to be able to get something back from your graveyard onto the battlefield, which you can potentially sacrifice again. And if you manage to have both of these cards in your deck and the Blight Reaper Thallid in the graveyard when you flip Nuzumi Freewheeler, you can go and get your Thallid back, flip it again, and get another 3 bodies to sacrifice. I also think Black-Red's a decent deck to potentially splash in, because Skittering Surveyor is a great body to sacrifice, and it's also going to ensure you hit your land drops and potentially hit your fixing. Skittering Surveyor, I think, is going to be one of the best common cards to pick early in draft. It's a 3 mana artifact 1/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a basic land, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and then shuffle. This is just going to help make your deck a lot more consistent, but in Black-Red, it's going to be sacrifice fodder as well. And here, I think you can use it to potentially splash some of the other uncommons. And one of the uncommons that I think is going to be quite good in this deck is Joyful Storm Sculptor, which is 3, a blue and a red for a 2/3 human shaman. And when it enters the battlefield, you create 2 1/1 blue and red elemental creature tokens. Whenever you cast a spell that has Convoke, Joyful Storm Sculptor deals 1 damage to each opponent and each battle they protect. Now again, this is 3 creatures in 1 card. And I think that's going to be really useful in the sacrifice deck. It's going to be useful if you have any Convoke cards. And additionally, it's going to be really useful if you've got Convoke cards and you want to destroy battles. It's just a high upside card, and a card I think you can look to splash if you've got some of the dual lands and Skittering Surveyors. Another one of those cards is Halo Forager, which is 1 blue and a black for a 3/1 flying fairy rogue. When it enters the battlefield, you may pay X. And when you do, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with mana value X from a graveyard without paying its mana cost, and then you exile that card. This is just a really efficient creature, and it gives you fantastic options to flashback removal or card advantage spells, or any other spell that you might have in your Black-Red deck. And I think you're not going to want to be sacrificing the 3/1 flyer a lot, but it's also another body to potentially sacrifice. Speaking of, there are some common sacrifice payoff cards. They're not as good as the uncommon ones, but the first one of them is Dreg Recycler, which is 1 and a black for a Phyrexian Beast 2/2, and you can tap it, sacrifice an artifact or creature, and then each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Now, I think this is the kind of card that you can just put in your deck as a 2/2 beater in the early game, and then if your opponent gets quite low, you can use it to sacrifice some loose artifact, additional incubate tokens. There are a few treasure tokens in the set to just ping your opponent for a few points of damage. And if they get down to 1 or 2, you can start sacrificing creatures to deal the final points of damage. It also allows you to consistently trigger Ichor Shade, which is 2 and a black for a 2/3 Phyrexian Shade. In the beginning of your end step, if an artifact or creature was put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Dreg Recycler is going to make sure that you can consistently pump this up every turn, and Ichor Shade can quickly become a 3/4, a 4/5, and even a 5/6 in the late game, which makes it a nice early blocker to stabilize the board, and also a threat to win the game at the end. The next card is Final Flourish, which is an instant with Kicker, sacrifice an artifact or creature, and it has the ability, target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. If this spell was kicked, that creature gets -6/-6 until end of turn instead. This is just a really flexible removal spell. It's going to be great in most black decks. However, black-red will have the fodder to make sure that you can take your opponent's big creature down if needed, all for the small cost of 2 mana. But what are you going to be sacrificing? Some of these cards here listed are the cards you're going to want to put in your deck to enable the sacrifice payoffs. The first of which is probably black's best common. It's Deadly Derision. It's 2 black for an instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker, and create a treasure token. This card's just going to be great in every black deck, I can't lie. But it does have some additional upside in the sacrifice deck, as you can destroy target creature or planeswalker, and then you'll be able to get more value out of the treasure token than most decks. The next one is Pyretic Prankster, which is a 2/1 for 1 and a red. It's a devil, and for 3 and a black or 2 life, you can transform it only as a sorcery into a 3/2 Phyrexian devil, and when it dies, each opponent sacrifices an artifact or creature. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this one plays out. It's a 2/1 for 2s, which isn't great, but it is going to be able to bash in the early game potentially and get some damage through. And then if you can flip it safely, it is a 3/2, which can trade for something, and then your opponent's also going to have to sacrifice an artifact or a creature. And then you can also sacrifice it yourself to trigger this ability and get value out of it. Why I think there's potential that this card may not be great is there are a lot of cards that have Incubate. And so if your opponent hasn't paid the mana to flip that token, they're going to be able to just sacrifice an Incubate 2 token for very little cost in response to this trigger, and it may not be as good as it looks. But for a 2 mana common with flexibility, I think it's fine, and I think you can start off by putting these in your deck. The next one, which I think will be good, is Ichor Drinker, which is a 1 black Phyrexian Vampire 1/1 with lifelink. And then you can pay black mana to exile it from your graveyard and incubate 2, and activate this only as a sorcery. So it's effectively 2 creatures in 1. You play it on turn 1 and you start gaining life. Then when they kill it, or you trade it off for a 2/1 for example, you can then pay 3 mana on the next turn to get a 2/2 Phyrexian artifact creature. This also has the ability of being able to be 2 things to be sacrificed, all for the cost of 2 mana, as you don't need to flip the artifact in order to sacrifice it for most cards. But the reason you want to be playing black-red isn't just the cheap commons, it's the amazing rares. The first of which is Rankle and Torbrand, which is 1 black-red for a legendary creature fairy dwarf, and it's a 3/4, and it has flying, first strike, and haste. Now, I think this card's already going to be quite good as a 5 mana flyer if you can cast it, but then it has whenever it deals combat damage to a player or a battle, choose any number. Each player creates a treasure token, each player sacrifices a creature, and if a source would deal damage to a player or battle this turn, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. I think you're going to want to trigger the last ability most of the time, and that's just going to put a huge clock and threat on your opponent. But the other 2 effects really help the black-red sacrifice deck in that you can create a treasure token to sacrifice, and you're more likely going to have smaller creatures to sacrifice to it than your opponent. The next card is Ayara, Widow of the Realm, which is a 1 black legendary creature elf noble, and it's a 3/3. And it has the ability to tap it to sacrifice another creature or artifact, and it deals X damage to target opponent or battle, and you gain X life, where X is the sacrifice permanent's mana value. I think the front side of this card is just really strong. It's an efficient beater, and in the late game if the board's stalled out, you're going to be able to use it to deal damage to your opponent, flip battles, and potentially win the game. But if that's not enough, you can play 5 and a red or 2 life to transform it as a sorcery into Ayara, Furnace Queen. which is a 4/4 legendary creature Phyrexian Elf Noble, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, you return up to one target artifact or creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, exile at the beginning of the next end step. This card's just really good and is going to go in every black deck, I think. However, in black-red, you're going to have the additional benefit of when it is flipped that the creature or artifact you return can attack, and then after it's dealt damage, you'll be able to sacrifice it before it's exiled for additional value. The next one is Grafted Butcher, which is 1 black for a Phyrexian Samurai 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, Phyrexians you control gain menace until end of turn, and other Phyrexians you control get +1/+1, and then for 3 black you can sacrifice an artifact or creature, return it from the graveyard to the battlefield, but only activate this as a sorcery. This is just an amazingly efficient card. A lot of the black and red cards are Phyrexians or flip into Phyrexians, so it's going to boost your team. And in the late game, you can use it to give your entire team, or most of your team, menace and +1/+1, and swing out. And then if they do manage to deal with it, you can just sacrifice one of your fodder artifact tokens or creatures to return it from the battlefield, and they've got to deal with it again. A really strong card. I think it's going to be great in the black-white deck, but it's also going to be quite good in the black-red deck as well. Another card that's going to be good in the black-red deck and the black-white deck is Bloated Processor, which is 2 black for a Phyrexian 3/2, and you sacrifice another Phyrexian, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and this can be done at instant or sorcery speed. And then when Bloated Processor dies, you incubate X, where X is its power. So even if you don't sacrifice anything to this, you're already going to get a 2-for-1 out of it, as it can trade for a 3 toughness creature, and then you can pay 2 mana to get another 3/3. However, if you've got cheap Phyrexians lying around, or just some spare incubate tokens you've flipped, you can sacrifice them to make Bloated Processor into a 5/4 or a 6/5, and then when they kill it, you're getting a 5/5 or a 6/6. This is just a great card, and you're going to want to play it in all your black decks. However, it's going to get additional value in black-red, where you've got a lot of cheap artifacts already ready to sacrifice. So the overall game plan of black-red is that the sacrifice matters theme. It does matter, and you're going to want to look to put cards in your deck that care about being sacrificed or having something to sacrifice for them. But the key to drafting these decks is balancing the fodder and the payoff. You don't want to have 10 cards that are all really cheap creatures that are good for being sacrificed, and only 1 or 2 cards that get the payoff for sacrificing things, because then you're going to be in a situation where you draw a hand with 4 little creatures and no payoff, and your opponent is playing big green creatures or flyers and bounce spells and just attacking you really efficiently, and you're not generating the value that you wanted to. I think this deck will have an aggressive and a controlling version, and you can play versions of it that have a really low curve and then use the sacrifice effects, such as the life drain, to deal the final points of damage. And I think you can have a more controlling value version, depending on what cards you get and how you like to draft. As I said before, I think the sacrifice payoff to deal the final damage is going to be a really key part of this deck, and the Dreg Recycler is a good card to help you do that. Black-red also has the possibility to splash with Surveyor and lands, so just keep an eye out for that late in packs to pick up some of the dual lands, as it will enable you to play some of the really strong multicolour rares in the set. So that's it. I'm really looking forward to drafting black-red, and make sure to subscribe below in order to see the draft videos when they're put up, where we'll certainly be drafting this type of deck in the first few weeks.